Do you seek an audience with my lord? Unfortunately, His Highness is absent. My lord, the king, the Queen has taken him.
Hello there, Seraphim 17 once again. This is my Dark Souls 2 walkthrough, and we are entering the Undead Crypt. We're in pretty much the final third of the game. This is the last linear sequence of events before we take on the final boss, and you hit that credit screen and decide whether or not you want to continue with Dark Souls, or whether or not you're exhausted and you're finished and you're going to move on to something else. But I'm going to take this place incredibly quickly. Obviously this is not a speed run, so it's not going to be as fast as it can be taken, but what I am going to do is show you a path that can get you through this area very fast with the least amount of effort needed, because the walkthrough and its intentions from the beginning have been to get you through this with a strategy that anybody can emulate, that is incredibly effective and non-skill reliant. And I've had a couple of comments on the previous videos that don't seem to have been understanding that precedence that I set from the beginning, so I'm going to address it now to try and help folks who were, maybe confused, or just to save some time and prevent further comments. But the enemies on this game, guys, are all intrinsically identical, and what I mean by this is they all have very similar attacks and they all behave in a very similar manner, which means if you know how to fight one of them, you will generally know how to fight all of them, because the way that they behave, it's the same fundamentally. And the one thing that mitigates all the issue with fighting the standard enemies is being first. If you let the enemy be first, if you play defensive, then that's when things become more difficult, and that's when you really need to know what the enemy is and what it does to understand how to fight it. The point of this walkthrough is to show you where those enemies are, and to show you that if you engage them first, they are not a threat. For instance, this right here. I knew that the Nameless Usurper was going to invade me, so I triggered the spawn, and I came back into this room to hit her with some hexes, and then I decided to finish her off with a mace, and as you just saw, she's very quick, she's very fast, and she beat me to the punch and nearly killed me, because it was a bad idea to do that. The hexes were perfect for that situation, the maces were not. And as long as you know where things are, and as long as you get to them before they get to you, wow, that was close. The majority of this game can be very simple. That doesn't mean that you won't take a hit, that doesn't mean that you won't die, because Dark Souls is one of those type of titles where even if it's not your fault, even if it's not carelessness, you can still take a death, because it just kind of happens. For instance here, those defender guys with the giant shields, if you stand there long enough they eventually attack you, and I rolled through there perfectly and had no issue with it, but there are instances where I've been trapped on their geometry and they've killed me because I couldn't roll past them, because it was physically impossible. And that is what Dark Souls is like, or Dark Souls 2 in particular. And it's one of those things where it's very difficult in the brevity of these videos for me to truly go into some of the more detailed analysis on some enemies and some bosses. So what I did to try and kind of remedy this was to make the video speak for itself. For instance, this section here. If you don't kill this little scrubber, he will ring a bell that makes this corridor, which already has a very large amount of enemies, it'll have even more enemies, because he rings a bell and it summons these phantoms. But if you kill him, this corridor is still very annoying, unless you want to bait the guys away from the door and then try and hit the boss fog, which I've done several times. I still don't think it's a reliable strategy, because you still take hits, and to me, a good strategy is a strategy where you don't have to take damage. So instead, we fight this enemy, which is the Armoured Cyan Armour guy. And there are two different versions of this fella. There are the halberd ones, who I'm fighting now, who you'll notice when they swing their halberd, it gets like elastic range, it's like Stretch Armstrong, and it's because as they swing, the animation lets the spear go further up their hand and then back into place again from where it is on a neutral position, which is a little bit unfair, because when you do that, it doesn't work that way. You are limited to the range of the weapon, but the computer, they get some serious additional range just because of the way the weapon works, and it reminds me a lot of Ornstein in the way that his weapons seem to be super long at times, and when you got it, it really wasn't as long as he made it seem. But this right here, if I had Scraps of Life on, would be simple, because Scraps of Life puts down an AoE that does damage and knocks them on the back. And because their tendency to block, the best strategy against these dudes is the backstab or the parry. And the parry timings are a little bit tricky when you're not using the Monastery Scimitar because they're very delayed, and this is not a playthrough where I will have that. If I did, I would parry every single hit they did and just chain criticals, but once again, it's a much more skill dependent and observation thing than it is anything else, so it doesn't help as much as, you know, wait for the attacks, bait the attacks, and either hit them with the spells or backstab them. And the only reason that this corridor is even remotely memorable is because there's far too many enemies on it, and the aggro range and the chain pulls that happens where you sometimes can fight 3 of them at the same time, even if you pull just one, for instance, just then, fighting 2 at the same time, and it can be tricky. But it can be overcome. And one of the interesting things that I don't quite understand with Dark Souls 2 is that these NPC-esque enemies can be damaged as they stand up, but actual NPC enemies get iframes during standing up. They get complete immunity. They also get a lot more immunity in their role than you will ever dream to have. And it's another great example of instances in Dark Souls 2 where I believe that the computer has a significant advantage over the player because they are able to do things you physically cannot. And I've got quite a fun video coming where I display things I love and hate about Dark Souls 2, and that's going to get covered in there because it's one of the cheesier aspects of this. But that is usually a 3-hit combo, that poke, and if you circle strafe to their right, it will miss you. The tracking is good enough sometimes that they can catch you in the first one, and they do considerable damage. Another thing to note, these guys are incredibly easy to chain backstab. You've not seen me do it because the mace is not the easiest weapon to chain the backstab. You'd probably be better with a dagger, something along those lines. But I do think that this is a fantastic example of bad level design rather than challenging level design. And a lot of my analysis on Dark Souls 2 that a lot of people perceive as being negative are just critiques, guys. Like, I really enjoy this game, and even when people try to make the argument that it was developed by a B team, because even if it was, it's the best game a B team's ever made. Ever. But the more knowledgeable people watching the video will just spot the mistake I made. I buffed my mace in the room rather than outside of it, and thank goodness that Velstadt is the type of boss who takes his time to get to you. But I love this guy, and he doesn't love me, as you just saw there with a massive range on his mace. Whenever you stand behind him, he has an insane amount of range on that reversal swing that he does just there, and he also can follow it up with that one. So the things to bear in mind, he does big damage when he lands, he has very wide swings that hit you in moments that can be quite questionable, and this is a buff that will increase his defense and his damage and give him a magical attack at distance. The easiest way to stop him doing the magical attack is do not give him the opportunity to do so. If you keep close to this dude, he can't do it, and as you just saw, you can break his poise. But be very careful, this is not like the other bosses where I poise crush them, because this guy, I don't know if it's the armor, I don't know if it's recovery off poise, I'm not entirely sure what it is, but you cannot get consistent stuns on him, they don't work. These hits here can be parried. I have a boss analysis of this dude coming, and I do some funny stuff with his swings. This is a big thrust, and he can also follow it up with another big swing. But the maces do good damage against this boss. The rapiers do as well, because armoured enemies, rapiers are really effective. And the hexers are very strong here as well, but what I wanted to show you was the melee focused fight against him. At any point I could hit him with Great Resonant Soul and take off considerably more than what I'm doing with the maces, but this video proves you don't have to, and it should also give you faith in, wow, you see what I mean? Yeah, mistime your roll and you will take some big damage, guys, so if you want to avoid that, increase your adaptability. If you don't, use a shield. This is a boss that suffers heavily by the fact you can pretty much block every single thing he does. And due to the focus of this walkthrough, we're not going to mess with King Vendrick. We're just going to get out of here and continue with the guide. So thank you for watching, and as always, you take care now.